Director of Afghanistan and Pakistan Studies at the Middle East Institute. Our program this morning is prompted by what we have seen as several crises in Pakistan: political, economic, humanitarian, environmental. Crises that, besides having a direct bearing on the well-being of the Pakistan people and the very future of the Pakistan state, also carry strong regional and global implications. The United States, following its proclaimed strategic priorities, has reduced its involvement with Pakistan, or at least changed the nature of it. This was so heavily driven, of course, by the conflict in Afghanistan. But our panel discussion today is premised on the view that it remains within the US's strategic national interests, security interests, to be regularly engaged with Pakistan and work toward normalizing cooperative relationships. In that context, the US has a considerable stake in what is currently happening in Pakistan and the meaning for the future of our relationship. A panel will also want to consider, I suspect, that what American policy may itself do that will influence, conceivably, outcomes in Pakistan. For our discussion, we have an eminently qualified panel. But before proceeding, just a few housekeeping details. Today's webinar will last approximately 90 minutes, and that will include time for your questions. The chat function is closed, but your questions for the panel can be submitted either through the Q&A function on your Zoom screen or by mailing events@mei.edu. And that's true for those tuning in via YouTube or the MEI website. The webinar is being recorded and will be available for rewatching online at mei.edu. And we hope while you're doing that, we'll also check out other events on our website. Now to a panel. Lisa Curtis is Senior Fellow and Director of Indo-Pacific Security Program at the Center for New American Security. She was formerly NSC Senior Director for South and Central Asia. Hussein Haqqani serves as the Director of South and Central Asia at the Hudson Institute and is a former ambassador of Pakistan to the United States. Douglas London is a non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute. He is a former CIA senior operations officer and an adjunct. He's currently an adjunct associate professor at Georgetown University. Javed Ahmed is also a non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute. Additionally, he's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council South Asia Center. And Javed is a former ambassador of Afghanistan to UAE. Now, panelists, let me say just one word here that our format here is going to be a series of questions, and we invite you, of course, to submit your own questions at any time during the course of the webinar, and of course, we'll get to them later on. So, panelists, as you look at it, how would you characterize the current state of U.S.-Pakistan relations? How do they compare with those of in recent years? Who'd like to start us off?
May I, Marvin?
Yes, please, Hussein.
Pakistan and the United
Hassan.
States have had intense relations on certain occasions. But in recent years, the relationship has not been intense. And in fact, under the Biden administration, there seems to be a willingness on the part of the administration to let the relationship drift. The assumption being that after withdrawing from Afghanistan, the United States does not need Pakistan the way it used to. So right now, the relationship is not comparable at all to the good days when Pakistan was described as America's most allied ally by President Eisenhower way back in the 50s, or even as close as it was under President Reagan, or for that matter, under President Obama. I think that Americans feel that their support of Pakistan in the past has not benefited America as much as they would have liked. And Pakistanis also are very disappointed with the United States. Right now, the relationship is at a level where there is functional engagement, but nothing like a close partnership.
Yeah. There's, including how does the United States, the people of the United States, the government of the United States view Pakistan? What seems...
I can check.
Please.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. It's great to be here, Marv, and thanks to the Middle East Institute for inviting me. And I agree with Hussein that certainly the relationship is not as close. Maybe there aren't the high-level meetings, regular high-level meetings between the U.S. and Pakistan that there were when the United States was in Afghanistan. But despite that high-level engagement, when we were in Afghanistan, there was still a great deal of tensions in the relationship. So I would say, there's two sides to the coin. We have less intensive high-level engagement with Pakistan, but also I would say there's slightly less tension because the U.S. doesn't have forces in Afghanistan that are getting targeted by the Taliban, which received sanctuary in Pakistan for so many years. So I would call relations cordial. I think, they're relatively cordial. There's not a lot of attention and thought going into U.S.-Pakistan relations at the strategic level. Really, foreign policy attention right now is focused on Russia. It's focused on China. It's focused on the Quad, relationships with India, Japan, Australia, with an eye toward a rising China. So I think, there is interest in the U.S. in trying to ensure that Pakistan doesn't fall even further into relations with China. They already have a very close relationship. We all are aware of the history and the relationship there and the Belt and Road investments that China has made in Pakistan. So that's not going to change. But I think that what the United States seeks to do is at least have friendly relations with Pakistan, so that there, is interaction, there's assistance programs. We see that the U.S. was a very large provider of assistance during the Pakistani earthquakes. So there is a certain amount of goodwill toward Pakistanis, despite the fact that those who followed Afghanistan closely, those who served in Afghanistan in the United States, there would be a negative view also because of Pakistan's sanctuary for the Taliban. But I think that is not overwhelming the attitude of most Americans toward Pakistan. I think there is still, a relative sense of, friendship with Pakistan. There are memories of the Cold War type of relationship that the U.S. had with Pakistan. And so I think if Pakistan, is supporting the Ukrainians, we've seen some reports of Pakistan providing artillery munitions through an air bridge going through the UK toward or for the Ukrainians. Something like that could help in reviving some of the goodwill that Americans have toward Pakistan.
In addition to the government-to-government relations, Doug, can you say something about the relationship between the intelligence services and more generally, does the military have its own relationship with the United States independently of civil authority?
Thanks, Marv. I was getting ready to jump in fact, based on some of the great comments from Hussein and Lisa. And first of all, I'm delighted to be here, even if I'm the token spy among a panel of much more elite and well successful folks. But what I would observe is on the surface, sort of speaking to what Lisa said, things are probably better than they've been superficially in terms of tensions. Ironically, Pakistan has now got what they wanted, but I think it's a lesson in be careful what you wish for in terms of driving the United States military from the region and the consequences to them, particularly with this Taliban government. One of the marks, I think, of U.S. policy that I saw as an intelligence officer was that the United States tended to play not to lose in dealing with Pakistan, worrying about here's this nuclear-powered nation. We have to make sure we keep it from imploding. And that was always the priority, I found, even when it came to Afghanistan. But we've seen Chief of Army Staff Bajwa here in the States. There's a lot more, I think, friendliness on the surface, but I think, as Hussein and Lisa both said, not a lot of substance these days to the relationship. The intel relationship with Pakistan has gone up and down, and I've probably witnessed more down than up, having spent a fair deal of time there in different parts of this arc, from at least before 9/11, after 9/11, and as of a couple of years ago. And there was sort of this initial post 9/11, all right, we're in it together, perhaps because, you're either with us or against us kind of thing. But we're in it together, and we did certainly some good work against al-Qaeda. But that drifted pretty quickly to a point where in the final years for U.S. intelligence, Pakistan was a denied operating area. The Pakistanis were spending a whole lot more time trying to catch us, harass us. They did some harm to, in fact, some officers, and they were very determined to find our agents, most of whom were really reporting on what was going on in Afghanistan. So tensions were high between at least the intel services. And I have been greeted with so many lectures and airing of the grievances during my times out there as a more senior officer, hearing how the United States has done Pakistan wrong, and you're going to leave us anyway. But now I think with things going somewhat poorly politically and perhaps economically, certainly economically as well, there's certainly a greater openness on the part of the military and the intel services to U.S. contact, even if there's not really substance. Because I think, as Lisa said, and as Hussein said, the Biden administration has not really been focused on, all right, what can we now do to build in this relationship now that we're out of Afghanistan? What can we do to look towards the region and the regional issues and the Indo-Pak conflict in Central Asia and Iran, which I think is a pity because now might be the good time to do it.
Javed, did you want to jump in?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's great to be here. I fully agree with all three comments. Look, the current state of U.S.-Pakistan relationship, as was mentioned, is cordial. The question is, will it last? Because we're talking about a relationship that's very tempestuous, a relationship that has, gone through, essentially a roller coaster. And every discussion that at least I have been part of over the last 2 years on kind of discuss the state of this bilateral relationship has generally been, an exercise, and at times a very futile exercise, and I told you so. And so, and this is, no surprise that if in the past that relationship or this relationship had been, dangerously messed up. So again, if it's cordial right now, will it last, or will it, become that roller coaster again and go downwards as was described by Doug? But look, I mean, this is also a relationship from almost every aspect that is in full contradiction with American values and American interests, and which is why I think it has become increasingly difficult to determine whether Pakistan is an imperfect friend or a clever enemy, or is it something in between? And what I believe is, in general, that, and this was mentioned, that there are two sides to this. And obviously, from what I see and what I read is that I believe Pakistan, all in all, is not a normal country. There's one senior Pakistani observer who once told me that it's an artificial country, which has all the ingredients for self-destruction, and it's not necessarily America's making. But some would argue that Pakistan will be a normal country once others start changing it, and that's right. But that's also not, true fully, because there are fundamental societal tensions right now, as was described by Lisa, inside Pakistan, about what a normal Pakistan means or what a normal Pakistan should be. And I think reaching that consensus, an acceptable consensus on this, rests with the Pakistani political and non-political class themselves to, effectively reimagine a normal Pakistan. And I know Ambassador Haqqani can speak the whole day about this, as he has written a whole book about this. But internally, I think Pakistan is undergoing a dangerous crisis of political and civilian identity. There's effectively this tug of war between the military ideologues, there's dynastic power holders, there are religious extremists, there are businessmen, and then now we also have these populist disruptors. So how I see it is that there are at least three competing and clashing identities inside Pakistan. There's a relatively weak, a politically weak civilian identity. There's a powerful military identity where the Pakistani army operates as, as the country's main overlords. And they have a very overbearing presence in national politics. And now there's also this populist identity in the mainstream involving these scores and scores of young, mostly conservative, urban middle class, and also angry Pakistanis who are challenging, their own systems, but also the system traditional partnership with countries like the United States. And I think that's something that we need to pay more attention to, especially this imbalance in the concentration of political power, which people like Imran Khan has increasingly challenged.
Thank you. Any further comments on this? We've just,
Yes, I have one.
Go ahead,
Marvin. I'd like to say that the paradox of the US-Pakistani relationship is that what brought Pakistan close to the United States soon after its creation in 1947 was economic necessity. Pakistan at that time had inherited 1/3 of the British Indian Empire's army, but only 17% of its resources. And so Pakistan really needed a partner that could help Pakistan economically, both in its development needs as well as in maintaining its security. However, Pakistan's leaders and successive leaders, and there's no single leader that can be blamed alone. It's a collective mistake. They have not really paid attention to the economic dimension of the US-Pakistan relationship, in the sense that the relationship right now is one of about $6.5 billion in trade a year, which is less than the trade between the United States and Morocco. So if there is to be a future of US-Pakistan relations that is not just based on military to military and intelligence to intelligence relations, and Doug has made a very valid point, both the Pakistani military and the Pakistani intelligence service are keen to get past Afghanistan, where they bet a certain way, they got what they wanted, and yet after getting what they wanted, they are having buyer's remorse. So that is one piece of it. But if there is going to be a longer term sustained partnership, it has to be based on more dimensions. And one of the biggest dimensions would be an economic one. Pakistan is neither a major American buyer of American products, nor is it a major exporter to the United States. And that needs to be rectified. Recently, you and several others were part of the Pakistan study group. We published a report that made many recommendations, and one of them was that this relationship needs to be right-sized. It was a relationship based on unrealistic expectations. The American expectation that Pakistan will somehow change its security calculus. Nobody changes their security calculus. They feel what they feel, and then others have to work around or with them. And so Pakistan made promises that were unrealistic. The Americans made certain comments that were unrealistic historically. And in the end, Americans felt disappointed that we poured in $43 billion into Pakistan and Pakistan didn't change. And Pakistanis are angry that you wanted to try to change us with your money. Both, I touch upon that in my book, Magnificent Delusions. I think we need to move forward, as the Pakistan Study Group suggests in its recommendations, with a right-sized, pragmatic engagement that is not built on excessive expectations on either side.
Okay, this has been excellent. Let me now move on and reflect on the fact that, as I pointed out, Pakistan is undergoing a series of crises. In what way does the future of U.S.-Pakistan relations hinge on the ongoing chaotic political scene in Pakistan? How that plays out? And in particular, given our experiences with Imran Khan over the last year, of this year, if, as seems very possible, he will return to power, what does that mean for our relationship?
I can jump in here, Marv.
Please.
Yeah, I don't think that the future of U.S.-Pakistan relations hinges on who is prime minister in Pakistan. It will have some impact around the edges, but more important is who will be the chief of army staff. It's still the army that controls decision-making over the issues of primary importance to the United States, such as the nuclear weapons program, Pakistan's relations with India, and the counterterrorism issue. So I think, even though Imran Khan very unhelpfully used the U.S. as a scapegoat when he lost power, I think that, were he to be reelected to power, there would be a certain amount of pragmatism that might, become part of the equation. And, perhaps there would be an effort to make amends with Washington if he were to come back to power. So, I'm not so sure, though, that, who is prime minister is really the deciding factor in terms of the U.S.-Pakistan relationship. I think it's much more complex than that. And it involves who is the chief of army staff and what kinds of policies will he potentially she, but most likely he would decide. And I just want to say a couple words about this hybrid system of democracy that we are talking about, this blending of, civilian electoral politics with military rule. Unfortunately, it's an inherently unstable form of governance. It fosters the type of gamemanship and confusion that we're seeing play out right now. And I think without the institutional practice of civilian dominance in a country, we will continue to see this political instability, this constant jockeying for power. And I think that, the civilians are not innocent, right? They also sometimes see it in their own interest to use the military to try to beat their political opponents, their civilian political opponents. So I think this overall lack of clarity in the system, this constant, seesaw approach, where the civilians try to use the military manipulates the civilian politics, it goes both ways, and it just makes for an inherently unstable system. And that's why we, are not seeing a smooth democratic process, and we're unlikely to see that in the future. And that's what causes so much concern in the United States, because we have a nuclear weapons power. We have a lot of terrorist militant groups still based in Pakistan. And when you have this unstable politics, it really causes a lot of consternation in the United States. And it really is unhelpful in terms of in Pakistan's own political economic development.
Excellent. Thank you. Other thoughts?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Javed.
Javed?
Doug, please.
I was just going to follow up on what Lisa said with a yes, agreeing with her comments, but maybe offering a bit more context. I don't know how many times I sat in front of an ISI general being told, Douglas, you Americans are making it difficult for us. You know, we need to keep this place together. There's all these disparate forces and extremist forces. And if we, the Army, lose the respect, lose this image of being all powerful, all knowing, we're going to lose control. Well, you know, first of all, you reap what you sow. You know, for years, the Army was seeding these extremist madrasas and working with jihadist groups, particularly Kashmiri liberation groups and such like that, and basically causing, I think, a great deal of what we now see. But at the same time, connecting to what Lisa said, yeah, the Army's in charge, but they're going to respond to what happens on the civilian side. Again, as you pointed out, Lisa, but you have Imran Khan, who's clearly wants to be a populist and who's a smart guy and who's looking to leverage all these disparate and divisive forces, to which the Army is going to have to respond and decide, what are we going to do and how far are we going to go? Do we just like go on the streets and crack heads, or is that going to open up this powder keg? And that's always been, in my perception as an intel guy, what the U.S. worried most about. Losing control of a, God forbid, jihadist, nuclear-armed Pakistan that who knows what they're going to do. And that's just not a fight that we want to have to deal with. So to that extent, right, the civilian government means for nothing unless they become a successful populist government and threatens the control of the Army. And then the Army has to think, well, do we work with that cooperatively, or are we threatened by that? And what are our options? So I do see Imran Khan as an interesting, curious guy who could cause a lot of trouble. And it's curious to see how far the Army let him go. But just thinking about some of the comments I heard from these generals in my waning days with them, they were not as confident in 2018 and 19 about their ability to just totally control everything as they were perhaps in the past. And there's a lot of factors for all that, but it's certainly something the United States has to watch in terms of how do we engage. Generally, right, we don't really focus that much on who's the civilian government, head of government, because it's the Army, but that sort of back and forth is going to be, I think, more important because of how bad things are right now internally in Pakistan.
Javed.
I would stress what Doug mentioned. Look, first, there's no functional consensus among Pakistan's different political, military, or their religious forces on the ground inside Pakistan, but also now this mercurial street that's increasingly expanding, but also they're increasingly loud about the kind of relationship they all want with the United States. You know, and the problem with all of this is that, as I see it, is that, you know, just like Afghans, you know, for every 2 Pakistanis, you have 5 opinions. So it's not up to the United States to decide for them, especially if there are practically 2 capitals right now in Pakistan, with the civilian government in Islamabad and the military government with, you know, operating their own bureaucratic processes and essentially their own enterprise in places like Rawalpindi. And they are, you know, they are and will continue to be the movers and shakers of the Pakistani national politics. But the very reason that the Pakistani society across the board are today violently debating their country's relationship with the United States and how the United States has mistreated Pakistan, as was mentioned, I think it validates the centrality of the American engagement in Afghanistan and also the centrality of the United States in Pakistani national politics. Because you know, to many people at the moment in Pakistan, the United States has arguably become its own political party, its own Pakistani political party or Pakistani political group inside Pakistan. When it comes to Imran Khan, I think he has shown through his own actions that, you know, his own approach, his foreign policy is centrally anti-American. And it's very much possible that he's not ideologically anti-American, you know, if you consider his past. He's certainly become a central anti-American figure through his own kind of exploitation of anti-American sentiments and that rhetoric inside Pakistan for his own tactical reason. And I think we should also not forget that anti-Americanism in Pakistan, in that entire region, is such a powerful force multiplier, and it is something that doesn't have any competition. So if Imran Khan returns to power, I think he still won't be able to bridge that divide that his rhetoric or his own actions has created between U.S. and Pakistan. But then again, nothing in Pakistan is forever. Nothing in Pakistan is irreversible, and we've already seen Imran Khan, making those shrewd attempts last week in the Financial Times, for example, when he said he wants good relationship with the United States. The challenge for him would be whether his political opponents who are currently running the government in Islamabad will give him a free pass, especially considering how, Imran Khan has discredited them as a government that's imported by the United States. Either way, whether, Khan or Imran Khan wins or he loses or something unexpected happens in between, like another assassination attempt, very much likely, very much possible. I think the one force that Lisa mentioned that really matters to the United States is the Pakistani army. And they generally want to maintain status quo in foreign policy, even though we don't know the actual breakdown of what that status quo involves. And I think that will be an important challenge for Khan should he returns to power, whether he will submit to the army's approach towards the United States and play the role of, say, a mayor of Islamabad, kind of constraining himself, or whether he will kind of continue his overreach and effectively act as a political IED by leveraging his own large following in an attempt to extend his own influence over the military. And I may be completely wrong in the last point, but in general, I think the Pakistani political class has not yet defined their national interest. They have national preferences, as each of these political groups have, but they're confusing those national preferences with national interests. I think the army has a very fixed notion about what Pakistani national interests are. Sit in China's lap, but fantasize about the United States. Ensure a dominant role in Afghanistan. Get Kashmir. And then make sure no one forgets that India is Pakistan's forever enemy. And I don't think that notion is going to change with Khan.
If I may say something, Pakistan's history shows that rhetoric always ends up having consequences. You may recall, Marvin, because among us all, you were there most during the Zulfikar Ali Bhutto era. Bhutto tried to pursue this policy of having a friendly relationship with the United States in private, but engaging in nationalist rhetoric at home, trying to play that card of trying to convince people that, oh, we are not anybody's slave, we are not going to be dominated by the United States, we are not going to be subservient to a superpower. That didn't end up well in the end. What happened was that a lot of people believed that his judicial murder was somehow connected to the United States, although there is no evidence of it. General Zia ruled with an iron hand. Then next, we move on. Under Musharraf, the United States and Pakistan had a very good functional relationship. Intelligence cooperation was high, military relationship was high, the money was flowing in. And yet, Musharraf never tried to stop the anti-American rhetoric, thinking that the anti-American rhetoric improved his leverage with the United States. Now, I think the moment has come where the military may actually have to give take a stronger stand, saying this rhetoric is going too far. Too many people in Pakistan have real delusions of grandeur. They really believe a new world order will come about in which Erdogan and Imran Khan will somehow challenge the dominance of the United States and even China. That is not happening. It's unrealistic. And Pakistan really needs a few years to focus on its economy and to find the consensus that Javed rightly points out doesn't exist.
What would it take for the military to decide that it must take things into its own hands? Is there a series of developments or a single development that would trigger that kind of thinking?
Doug?
So I'll jump in a little bit, but I really obviously defer to Ambassador Haqqani, who's knows the society so well. As an outsider who dealt with them a lot, I found them to be very much a consensus-oriented organization. Baj was chief of army staff during my last couple of years, but as strong a leader as he might have been, he really worked with his corps commanders, and they wanted to be on one page, which I think is part of the reason why. I think, as Hussein, Elise, and Javed always said, the Army is always focused on status quo. They don't like changes. They don't like doing things particularly different. They're being faced with new threats that they couldn't just bully their way out of these days. Very strong grassroots movements, political parties that they tried to squash that they couldn't. They've moved Imran Khan out, but they've been careful with him. We'll see if they actually want to make a martyr out of him or make him go to jail. So being focused on the status quo, they don't want a threat, and it's, and again, I want to be a little bit careful, but times I lived in Pakistan, the house I lived in usually was owned by a general. The generals own the houses. The military had the money. It's treated them very well, but at the same time, they're very nationalistic. They're very patriotic, what I found. They find themselves, they believe themselves to be military leaders, but they also separate themselves, I found, again, Hussein, please correct me, in being in a different class. It's a Muslim society, you shouldn't really have class, but this elite group considered themselves very much elite. And I believe they would react to a genuine threat to their status quo, to their system, but the decision won't be, okay, are we worried about bloodshed? Because I don't think they really have a problem with that. But are we worried that if we start bloodshed, will it get out of our control? The army's big, but Pakistan's a big country. And if things really blew up in a tinderbox, I don't think all the king's horses and all the king's men could, put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And I think that's going to be the calculus. And from what I've seen, I think that's been Bajwa's calculus in, dare I say, and please, but some restraint a bit with some of these populist movements and protests from some of these political parties.
Whatever one might say about the Pakistan Army, they do have a well-defined outlook on what Pakistan's national interest is. It may not be what I define as Pakistan's national interest, what many politicians define as Pakistan's national interest, but that's how they define Pakistan's national interest. Since they define Pakistan's national interest a certain way, their interventions always take place when they think that national interest is under threat. Secondly, the army doesn't like chaos. They certainly don't like economic drift. They won't, so anything that threatens Pakistan from outside or inside is a concern for the Pakistan military leadership. The military is also part of Pakistani society. And the consensus in Pakistan after General Musharraf's tenure has been that direct intervention by the military is not a good idea. And the army has been upholding that consensus by not intervening directly. But if their ability to influence the course of events from behind the scenes becomes more and more limited, which it is becoming because of the media, social media, and the total intransigence of Imran Khan, because you must remember, all other political actors played within certain limits. They didn't cross certain limits with the military. Imran Khan is playing for chaos, and if he's going to play for chaos, then the army is definitely going to assert itself in a way in which that chaos can be checked. But above all, Pakistan has economic challenges, it has security challenges, it has to worry about the TTP, which it has unleashed by mistake without realizing that that would be the consequence, even though people like myself are pointing that out for a long time, that will be the consequence of a Taliban victory in Afghanistan. And the Taliban are not necessarily playing ball with them. Then Iran is unpredictable from Pakistan's point of view. So Pakistan is surrounded by challenges. And in an environment like that, if all the politicians can do is squabble, then the military definitely has something more to say than they have said so far. What that might be, we will have to see how that unravels.
Lisa?
Yeah, I wanted to point out, we've only seen one Pakistani chief of army staff, Jahangir Karamat, step down at the behest of the civilian leadership. That is the only time we have seen a chief of army staff act deferentially to the civilian leadership. And I think that, the military is in a very difficult position right now, because I don't think they expected that so much support would pour out from the Pakistani public for Imran Khan. I think they've probably been taken aback about the extent of the protests, how many people have come out. He's a very popular leader in Pakistan. So, they will have to be very careful in their next steps. And, whoever is made the next chief of army staff will, come into the job with, an enormous challenge. And it will be interesting. I think, the ego of that chief of army staff will be important in this whole mix. And I agree with Doug's earlier statement that really the chief of army staff, operates on consensus, needs to get the consensus of the corps commanders. But at the same time, I think, the personality of whoever takes over that position is going to be very important, because Imran Khan is a force that will have to be, paid attention to. They're not going to be able to ignore the popularity that he commands inside Pakistan. So it's going to be a delicate balancing act, I think, for the military and what they may seek to do behind the scenes.
I seldom disagree with Lisa, Marvin, but I have to say something that I think that this assumption that Imran Khan is very popular, he's popular, he has a cult-like following, but none of his rallies have been comparable to Benazir Bhutto's return in 1986, or for that matter, Nawaz Sharif's rallies immediately after he was thrown out of power in 2017 and 18. I think that he has created a very cult-like following that is very active on social media, that keeps him alive. But even that has limits. So I think that the reason why, for example, no one has really listened to him about holding an immediate election is because an immediate election may have benefited him. But I think once time goes by, the normal politics of Pakistan's constituencies and districts starts playing in, I think that he will be a force, but he will not be the force that he has been projecting. And that is why he's backing off. He backed off on his criticism of the United States in his interview with the Financial Times. Next day, in another speech, he backed off from his criticism of the army chief. And he has also started backing off from his general criticisms of the military, repositioning himself, because he realizes that the positions he took to become popular and create that sentiment of populism has also the elements of causing a run within his party that may not keep it in a position to win a future general election.
That's an interesting point that you made in comparison with Benazir Bhutto when she returned. But is there a distinction here that the crowds that he has, they seem quite large to me. But I think what really stands out is there seems to be anger in these crowds. There has been success on his part in taking the grievances out there and channeling them as he has. If he returns to power, and you're suggesting that this won't happen, is it not, if he does return with a really sweeping victory, if that should happen, would then, for someone who has this enormous ego to begin with, would that so swell his head that he might try to do what Benazir Bhutto's father did when he came to power, and on the strength of his populist appeal, really sideline the military?
And what sidelined the military? What sidelined the military after was the 1971 military defeat
The
in East
defeat is
Pakistan.
quite important. Yes.
It was that, not the popularity. Look, Zulfikar Ali
Took advantage of that. Yeah.
he got 36% of the vote in West Pakistan. It gave him more seats, much more seats than anybody else, because Pakistan was a multi-party system, and that vote bank remained intact for a long time until recently. Imran Khan's vote bank is a similar one. But again, that does not necessarily mean that in one-on-one contests, they will necessarily sweep the election. No one's ever swept an election in Pakistan except Nawaz Sharif in 1997, when he won 2/3 of the majority. District politics, regional politics, PTI has no presence in Sindh and Balochistan. But having said that, let me just say, angry crowd, okay, so what is the anger about? The anger is about Imran Khan losing power. That anger will dissipate once Imran Khan comes back into power. Those people will actually want something. What does he have to offer? No economic program. This is not like Zulfikar Ali Bhutto promising roti kapra makan or bread, shelter and clothing. This is actually a nationalist anger. It is the kind of anger that sort of, sorry for using that comparison, I don't use it lightly, but fascist leaders always use that, our country is not as good as it ought to be. It's a right-wing nationalism. And that is not necessarily going to find a channel other than anger. So yes, Pakistan's foreign policy is going to be in deep trouble if Imran Khan does come back. It will be rhetorical against India, although he keeps saying nice things about India every now and then, hoping that that will keep that channel open for him for the future. His mercurial behavior is not necessarily going to win many friends for Pakistan. Pakistan needs resources flowing in from China, United States, the international financial institutions, Saudi Arabia, and other Gulf countries. And to keep them all on board, you need to have non-radical policies, and Imran Khan does not offer those.
Very useful. Anyone else on this, Jabin?
Just very quickly, I think, I agree with Ambassador Haqqani, but I think there's a little bit more to this anger than we see, more in the open domain or on the surface. I think when Imran Khan was, first elected, well, when he first emerged to the political scene in Pakistan, he was a statistical outlier in Pakistani national politics. But only in time after his own alliances or tactical alliances with the Pakistani army, and then his subsequent kind of falling out of their good graces, he realized that, through his own following, celebrity following, populist messaging, that if he were to fundamentally change the Pakistani society, he has to first selectively break it and then remold it into, into these kind of pieces of his own vision, a vision that he, often describes as an independent Pakistan or a self-reliant Pakistan, a welfare state that's free of all types of moral and material corruption. And interestingly, I think when you look at it across the broader region, this vision of Imran Khan as a disruptor, as a political disruptor, is no different than the vision of the Taliban in Afghanistan right now. So, and the problem is, if you're a disruptor, you are generally listening to your own voice. And in doing so, I think you're going against anyone bigger, whether it's inside Pakistan like the military or outside like the United States. You're going against anyone stronger or richer, again like the United States. So going against someone bigger, stronger, or richer doesn't really matter to you. Again, you're listening to your own voice. But as Ambassador Haqqani mentioned, it is an established truth that the Pakistani military are Pakistan's overlords, and they will remain overlords for the coming decades. They are very disciplined, they're very cohesive, they're non-factional, even though they have many, tentacles, from their intelligence to their, mullahs to their militants. They also enjoy enormous resources. They're alarmingly active, including politically active. They're also very patient. They're also very ruthless. They operate a very large bureaucratic enterprise under, their own kind of self-created, self-manufactured philosophy that they need enemies to remain relevant, and they need enemies to remain in control. Now, those enemies could be domestic enemies, just like Imran Khan. And I think the Pakistani military understands that all too well. So we need to kind of think beyond think beyond kind of that anger that we see on Imran Khan's long marches.
Well, if there's nothing else, let's move on. I have other questions, but you've really covered so many of them already that I won't have to ask them. Lisa, were you about to say something? Oh, I'm sorry. All right, then. You've touched on the public opinion for the United States on that. Do we have anything further to say about that? To what extent is that going to be a constraint here? After all, so much has been not just Imran Khan, but as was pointed out earlier, has socialized the public toward a very conspiratorial perception of the United States, and that, no respect, ignoring our vital interests, deliberately working against us. Does a leader have to take that strongly into account in moving forward with the relationship?
You're asking, does a U.S. leader?
No, I'm talking about Pakistani leaders. To what extent is this in any way hem them in what they can do, having fed this kind of rhetoric to them over this long period of time? Just how much flexibility do they have now? We did see and people always bring this up, in 2005, how the United States stepped in and helped with the relief effort after the earthquake, how quickly it did seem, at least for a while, to change the attitude toward the United States. Is this possible any longer?
Well, I think it does have something to do with what's happening in Afghanistan. And the reason why, I had indicated earlier that I could imagine a possible future where Imran Khan might become a little bit more pragmatic regarding dealings with the United States, even though he clearly saw it in his political interest to use the U.S. as a scapegoat a few months ago when he lost power, is, largely what I saw during the Trump administration and the relationship that Imran Khan had with the United States. Of course, he visited the United States. He had a good visit, good meetings with President Trump. So he definitely can take on that role of, having a more positive relationship with the United States. But also at that time, the United States wanted something from Pakistan, and that was help with the peace process. So now that, the Taliban has taken over Afghanistan, the issue is not behind us. And in fact, we see things moving in extremely negative direction with the Taliban cracking down on women. We saw that Zawahiri was found in a house associated with Sirajuddin Haqqani, the interior minister of Afghanistan. So things are going in a very negative direction in Afghanistan, and Pakistan's links to the Taliban will remain a source of tension between Washington and Islamabad. And this, as the Taliban gets more extreme in how it's governing the country, cracks down more on women, human rights in general, I think you will see more tensions between Pakistan and the United States. And so that would impact any leader who might come to power in a new election, and including Imran Khan, where there's been particular sympathies with the Taliban. So that could really inform the future direction of the U.S.-Pakistan relationship moving forward. So there are many different factors. And, I agree that Imran Khan has, riled up his supporters with this anti-American sentiment. but I think he also has the capability to tamp that down should he choose to do so.
Any other thoughts on this?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm actually on the same topic, but certainly pivoting off something Lisa said. I'm curious whether Pakistan and Taliban relations, Pakistan-Afghan relations, as they continue to go south, as things get worse in Afghanistan, are actually not more likely to improve U.S.-Pakistani relations. I think that, again, be careful what you wish for. The Taliban's been no friend to Pakistan in terms of its engagement of the TTP. I think it was an absolute delusion for anyone to believe that the Taliban were going to abandon any of the groups with which it cooperated over the long years of the war, and the TTP were. Certainly, if the Taliban wanted to do something about the TTP, they could, but it was after the Taliban took over that there was actually a TTP offensive. So we've seen Bajwa first appoint Faiz Hamid over to Peshawar, thinking, okay, who gets along better with the Taliban than the former DGISI? Of course, that didn't last terribly long. He's now moved over, and he put a very capable general there now. So I think that there's really a possibility that, at least on the military side in Pakistan, they're going to be thinking, you know what? Maybe we need to work more a little bit with the United States to kind of keep that door open. But the bigger problem there, and I think, Marvin, you have it as a question, and I hope I don't steal your thunder and rush too early, about can we decouple Afghanistan from the relations with Pakistan? That's not really the challenge. It's decoupling India. As a U.S. intel guy, it was always India for the generals. Everything was India. Everything they did was seen through the Indian prism. They had to be in Afghanistan. They had to work with the Taliban because of India. On the other side of it, India is focused on China. For India, from a security posture, more like, Pakistan's an annoyance these days, and they've got to, keep guard, but it's really to them all about China. And I know we struggled as a government about, can we find some sort of transformational approach to Pakistan that takes India out of the equation? And, Lisa chaired these meetings, and the intentions were always good. It's like, what can we do about that? Can we sort of, transformationally get them to focus more about the greater region, and they're good? And ultimately, it's like, nah, we can't. And it was always transactional after transactional after transactional. So I think the bigger issue is, can we decouple Pakistan from India? And I don't think we can. But in terms of, as things get worse in Afghanistan for Pakistan, that's probably going to help encourage and improve engagement, at least on the military and security side, between Pakistan and the United States.
Since we've introduced China, clearly the relationship that China has with Pakistan is important for Pakistan, critical for Pakistan. To what extent will it determine the extent to which U.S.-Pakistan relations can improve?
I'm sorry, Martha, that was for me. My volume kicked out, so you'll have to repeat that one more time.
Yes, I'm saying, since we were brought up here, China, to what extent does China, that coupling with China that you've mentioned, to what extent is that going to figure in the extent to which the United States, or the nature of the U.S. relationship with Pakistan?
So I'm sorry, was that for me, or Lisa? I'm happy for you to handle it.
I just wanted to say something briefly, and I think it does matter. Look, China is the number one challenge for the long-term challenge for the United States. This was stated clearly in the Biden administration national security strategy. And so the U.S. needs all the partners and allies that it can muster to deal with competition from China right now. And so I think it does matter. As I said earlier, the U.S. is never going to peel Pakistan away from its reliance on China. That relationship will be strong. But I think what the U.S. can hope for is that at least the U.S. can balance that out. that Pakistan won't be solely reliant on China. And one of the things about General Bajwa is he was very clear that he valued Pakistan's relations with the United States, and he really wasn't the type of leader to try to feed any of the anti-American sentiment coming up from the Pakistan public. And I think, he as a leader did see benefit in not being solely dependent, not having Pakistan be solely dependent on China. And so he really did work to keep that balance between the US and China, even when the United States cut off military assistance to Pakistan in January 2018. So, again, I think the US is prioritizing China, and that it will matter the extent of Pakistan's relationship with China, and that the US will seek to try to, have these friendly, cordial relations with Pakistan so that Pakistan doesn't become solely reliant on China.
Doug?
Yeah, I think, from my perch again, spy, I've got no problem with Pakistan having a relationship to a degree with China, because they're getting things from China that I don't think we want to give them. But at the same time, and who put it? Was it you, Lisa, or Hussein, or Javed, who said, Pakistan, the military lease, they have to have the relationship with China, but they dream of a better relationship with the United States. I really think that's true. I think there's an advantage there to, and again, I was never a policymaker, allowing Pakistan to have some room to have a good relationship with China that we could then take advantage of as well in terms of security and regional issues and such like that. But then counting on the fact they'd much rather have F-16s from the United States than, MiGs from China. And they take a certain pride in their relationship with the United States that I don't think they see as anything but more as necessity from China. So, from an intel point of view, I see no need to really, peel them back from China extensively. I think they could have their due. I think there'll be a difference though on the policy side.
Very quickly, Marvin, just very briefly, look, the China-Pakistan relationship is not a partnership of equals. You have a big country like China, and you have a smaller country, even though, this is a country twice the size of California, not economically, of course, but, in terms of land mass. But this is not a partnership of equals. No matter, what kind of fancy words of adjectives the Pakistani leaders use to describe this partnership or this relationship today, Pakistan is on the verge of financial default. The Pakistani leaders themselves have said it, starting from Imran Khan to others, because of its massive external debt. It's like, close to $135 billion as it stands. There's also low domestic productivity, economic productivity inside Pakistan. There's shrinking domestic revenues on the Pakistani sides. Their foreign reserves have really dwindled. It's at the moment, I was looking it up, it was about $9 billion. That's basically the reserves that that Afghanistan's have frozen in the United States and elsewhere. So think about it, the size of those two countries, $9 billion. And you also have, the Pakistani currency that's largely depreciated. And the interesting thing is that at least one quarter, if not more than one quarter, of this external debt is owed to China. So where is China in this kind of, in this rescue plan? Why are they not coming to this rescue? Why have they halted, their signature China-Pakistan economic corridor or CPEC related investments? Or better yet, why hasn't that, flagship $65+ billion program not brought meaningful difference in local people's lives inside Pakistan? Why are Pakistani exports to China stagnant? And why is, the China-Pakistan bilateral trade heavily skewed in favor of the Chinese, even though there is a free trade agreement between the two countries? And I know Ambassador Khani and I have written a large piece about this, but the important thing is, why aren't Pakistani leaders questioning this unequal relationship with China? And I think the Pakistani leaders there's a certain fascination with China, and they see that kind of Chinese relationship and their model of cooperation in the form of, maybe, I'm just guessing here, in the form of non-interference in each other's affairs. And they almost always, at least publicly, support each other's even internal measures to perhaps to ensure stability or that semblance of stability. Pakistani leaders often, even when they come to a place like Washington, they tell Chinese story or China story, elsewhere because of that fascination. They've even tacitly endorsed China's own policy against the Uyghur population. Some even call them that, oh, this is the Chinese version of counterterrorism inside Pakistan, and that it doesn't really matter to us. So Pakistan is already too deep in the China camp, and I think it's also too dependent on them. In fact, if it wasn't for China right now, Pakistan in that entire region will essentially be friendless. So, but it certainly does not mean that the United States should go out and out-invest China in Pakistan through, grand new projects, like geoeconomics. It's fun to imagine geoeconomics and all the fancy words, but as soon as you step into Pakistan, I think that illusion about both the geo and the economics part is broken. Plus, the return on investment for these countries is almost always in the negatives.
Let me ask
China is not going to.
Go ahead.
China is not going to indefinitely pour money into Pakistan. China has been rather circumspect about putting money into Pakistan recently. It wants a return on its investment. It's been very slow to give Pakistan debt relief. And in the end, Pakistan is having buyer's remorse vis-a-vis China a little bit. But I agree with Javed that Pakistan's relationship with China is very, very deep. Question for the United States is, do we want that relationship to go to the point where there is just no balancing influence of the United States in Pakistan, or should the United States at least keep a presence and engagement in Pakistan, pragmatic engagement, modest engagement, but engagement nevertheless with some seriousness rather than just walking completely away? We do not want, nobody wants Pakistan to be the hermit kingdom a la North Korea, and Pakistan's elite doesn't want it. So if Pakistan does want engagement with the United States, why not take advantage of it rather than just shut your doors on it? That's the point here. Not that the United States can be able to win Pakistan away from China.
Well, following with that thought, if you were advising the U.S. now as how to normalize relations, how to in general improve relations with the Pakistan people, and with, for one thing, the image here that the United States only cares about a military relationship with Pakistan, what kind of advice would you give the American policymakers now on what to do and indeed what not to do?
Who do you want to go first?
Any takers, please? Please.
Okay, I'll jump in there. Having looked at this relationship from the policy perspective for many.
Exactly.
I think that I would come back to something Hussein said earlier. We need to right size our expectations. For so long, we tried to influence Pakistan's security calculations, and in the hopes that they would, cut support to the Taliban, not provide a sanctuary. That clearly did not happen. Even with cutting the large-scale military assistance, Pakistan did not budge from its position of providing sanctuary for the Taliban. So we need to have, I think, modest expectations. Pakistan is never going to see eye to eye with us on counterterrorism issues. We may be able to cooperate against ISIS-K, certainly that's going to happen. But, the reality is the Taliban remains allied to al-Qaeda. I don't think we're ever going to get Taliban's cooperation against al-Qaeda. And Pakistan's always going to remain allied with the Taliban. So I think we just need to have realistic expectations with regard to what Pakistan might or might not do. Now, I would come back to the China issue, where I do think they welcome our engagement, and they don't want to be solely reliant on China. So we can look at things like trying to build up our trade relations, looking at some, investment, even though there are, like Javed said, so many restrictions on the business environment, and it's not an investor-friendly country for many, many reasons. But, the U.S. can try to focus on incentivizing U.S. companies, and assistance programs. We provide a lot of humanitarian assistance to Pakistan, particularly following the flooding. We should be emphasizing that. What I think we shouldn't do is we shouldn't resume large-scale military assistance. That is just not something that is helpful for the region, because we know that Pakistan used F-16s in their last showdown with India in 2019, when you had the dogfight in February 2019 following the massive terrorist attack on Indian security forces by the Jaish-e-Mohammed, a Pakistan-based terrorist group. So, I think that the U.S. needs to steer clear of any large-scale military assistance that would impact the security balance or somehow embolden Pakistan in its animosity with India.
Okay. Anything else in the ways of do's and don'ts with Pakistan?
Very quickly, Marvin, what to think about going forward. I don't think it's just the Pakistani military or their, history or track record of nefarious activities, both inside Pakistan, but also in Afghanistan, or it's just Imran Khan and his, populist celebrity politics that we should be worried about. I think there are also others that we need to be worried about inside Pakistan, starting from the Islamist parties. For an example, look, between more than a dozen religious parties and groups that currently operate in Pakistan, they collectively leverage over easily more than 5 million votes alone, just votes. I'm not even talking about the rest of their constituents. And most of they have, very strong representation, both in national parliament, but also in provincial government. Just think about it. More than 5 million Pakistanis vote for violently anti-American religious parties because they prefer these religious parties over other mainstream parties, and they have a say. These parties have a say in Pakistan's foreign relations, as well as how the Pakistanis or leaders should be conducting their relationship with countries like the United States. So if they have a say in it, that's quite dangerous, and I think that's something that folks here in Washington needs to know. And in many ways, I think the Pakistani army has enabled these very groups by bringing them into the mainstream, which has fundamentally transformed the Pakistani political landscape. Second point is that my view on this whole coupling or decoupling is that the United States, whether that relationship was hyphenated or dehyphenated, whether that was hyphenated with China or India or with Afghanistan, the United States has always been, or almost always been, on the losing end in this partnership. And it's largely because neither the interests nor the values of these two countries were synonymous or aligned. And we saw it during the Afghanistan campaign, how those interests were, diametrically opposed to one another, and how, Pakistan simultaneously played a role in support of both the United States war on terror and then the Taliban's war off terror. And even today, with the Taliban's takeover, I don't see a longer term shared functional understanding between Washington and Islamabad or Rawalpindi, either on the way forward in Afghanistan, or on counterterrorism inside and outside Pakistan, or our relationship with China or with Russia, as we saw it with Imran Khan's trip there, or even with India. And I think that's because those interests have remained, mutually exclusive. And I think that's something that we really need to think about. And I agree with Lisa that no large-scale military assistance. I think we should adopt an approach that I would describe as less is more. So the less we do, the more it is.
Doug, do you have any sense here about what you would think are the opportunities for closer intel cooperation between Pakistan and the United States? That's always been there, one would assume, at some level. It's changed, obviously, over time. Are there opportunities here to strengthen that?
Well, Marvin, it's a spy's dream come true to actually recommend something to a policymaker, since it's generally frowned upon for us to do.
But
that.
You're not in that role right now.
I know, right? This is awesome.
I hope you're not still.
And I see Lisa cringing at what I might think of. But the problem is there are practical areas that one would think, from assessing the circumstances in Pakistan, that Pakistan could benefit from greater cooperation on the intel side. And that's how you have to incentivize it. It's like, what's in it for them, right? So, say what you will, Pakistan, the military, they're worried about the Taliban. I don't necessarily think that is a relationship destined for, indefinite harmony, because they're worried. Pakistan military intel side, they're worried about Iran. And they've been worried about Iran for a while. That's definitely an area of concern for them. And I believe that if they take a step back and admit it to themselves, and I think some have, some of these jihadist groups have gotten out of their control. The Lashkar-e-Taiba group has become much more of an international group now. They're not just focused on Kashmir liberation. Jaish-e-Mohammed, and Lord knows I remember the Indians just pleading with the United States, you got to do something, you got to do something. I don't know how much control they have. So were I to recommend areas, it would be delicate, but there are areas that Pakistan needs help on. They're just going to be a little reluctant to do it with us. And there was such a toxic relationship at the time I was leaving. You talk about Islamic State. Lisa, you're exactly right. Obviously, Pakistan and the United States should be working on the Islamic State. Yet I sat across from an ISI general who said, Douglas, you created IS. I was like, sorry, me personally? But, buying into a lot of the Russian propaganda that the Islamic State's a creation of the United States, and whether they really believe it or not, or they're just angry, or he was having a bad day, that's what I got to hear. So I would think you need some confidence building areas of cooperation. But let me tell you, United States intel has to be on the ground in Pakistan. There's a lot of stuff going on there that we need to keep an eye on. We need to keep an eye on these Islamic groups that are very extremist and looking to, take power. We need to take a look at, Pakistan's nuclear weapons. Now, for years, the United States has always prioritized equities where the Pakistanis would allow us some role in helping them safeguard their nuclear forces. I don't think that's at a place we would like it to be right now. And I would like to think that that's an area that we should find an incentivizing way to get the Pakistani military to allow us to help them. But I think it's difficult. And again, I've been out of government for a couple of years. I don't know if things have gotten better or worse, but they were pretty poisoned when I left with Pakistan. And even though there were practical areas that have made sense for them, not just us, for them to cooperate with the U.S., I don't know if they're there yet, but if things keep getting worse in Pakistan, they're going to be some point without a whole lot of choice.
Very good. Picking up on some of the questions that have been raised by our viewing audience, one question has to do with whether the U.S. will, or how the U.S. could demonstrate that it really cares to support a civilian power, civilian government in Pakistan. How does the United States best convey that it really does value a democratic system over a relationship simply military to military?
let me just say that the United States has more than once said that it would prefer a civilian government. It would want the civilian government to have full control over all aspects of policy. The United States wants Pakistan to be a democracy. But in the final analysis, the US conducts foreign policy primarily to promote its own interests. So the expectations of a lot of Pakistanis, and I was one of them when I was younger, that somehow the United States will make democracy effective in Pakistan, that the United States will somehow ensure civilian ascendancy in Pakistan, is unrealistic. That has to take place as a result of politics within the country. That has to do with the civil-military balance, but it also has to do with civil-civil balance. How can the civilian politicians work with one another? Look at Imran Khan's agitation. He lost a parliamentary vote of no confidence. There are 79 parliamentary democracies in the world. Parliamentary votes of no confidence take place almost everywhere, all the time. And what happens is, once you're voted out, you sit in the opposition in parliament. Instead, he chooses to go out on the streets. Pakistan has had that even before. If the Pakistani politicians can have a consensus on the rules of the game, then they can certainly establish civilian ascendancy. But I think it is asking too much of the United States to intervene in Pakistan's domestic politics, which it won't do, and it is not in America's interest to do.
Right. Any other thoughts about that? Again, now looking at some of the questions that come in, and of course we invite some more in the remaining time that we have here. One said, this is directed directly at Doug. Did the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan mean that the ISI achieved its goal in Afghanistan? Considering the political instability in Pakistan, will the US ever support a civilian well, that we've addressed already. How would you respond to this, Doug, if you wish?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was the worst kept secret in the world, Pakistan's relationship with the Taliban and their support to the Taliban. And that was always a struggle for the US government in terms of, how hard do we push Pakistan? And I believe there was always concern that, well, we can only push them so hard because if we push them too hard, we'll break them, we'll break the relationship, and maybe we'll break the military's control, and then there'll be chaos and such like that. I never subscribed personally to that, but that was, I think, the prevailing point of view. So the military kind of got what they want, and I qualify with kind of, because it's not that the military is in love with the Taliban. These folks they're religious, but they're not like the Taliban. And their goal was preventing Afghanistan from becoming the purview of India. Again, everything's through that whole India prism. And they saw Indian encroachment, and they saw, oh my God, the Indians will have another front on us, by having troops in Afghanistan and such. So Pakistan's goal was, my humble opinion, again, this whole status quo thing. Right? They wanted Afghanistan that was not hostile towards them, and they felt they had a better shot with the Taliban. But I don't think they're really thrilled with a Taliban that's not Taliban 2.0. I think it wasn't just the U.S. government that was hoping for Taliban 2.0. I think it was the Pakistan military that was hoping for a Taliban 2.0, and that didn't happen. So now you have a Taliban that's not going to break its relationships with Al-Qaeda, with any of these Sunni extremist groups, with the TTP, which is a bit of a nightmare. And I think, and I've written on this as well, that I think we lose sight of the threat that a Taliban-controlled Afghanistan poses to the entire region in terms of the instability it could sow, even if it's not actively promoting the revolution or the extremist groups, just kind of letting them operate there. So, again, it's be careful what you wish for. At the beginning, Afghanistan, the Pakistani military and intel side were always, oh, Douglas, we're with you. If you know where Siraj Haqqani is, you just tell me. In fact, just come into my office. I'll go right to a helicopter with you and we'll fly to Siraj's house. Meantime, we're observing, meetings between these same ISI guys and Siraj Haqqani. and it's accomplishments, but I can't go, I got you and I could show you because, it wasn't going to make any positive difference. So I think that, again, by seeing the world through this Indian prism, that the military didn't really do themselves much good, which is why I actually think in an ironic way, there's some room to work with Pakistan in terms of figuring out what's going on in Afghanistan. They want to know as much as we do what's going on, and they want to kind of influence things as well. But there's a lot of mud in that water to get past, I think, going forward.
Another question, this I know has come from Australia. Isn't it a problem that Washington formulates its policy vis-a-vis Pakistan without thinking about how things look from Islamabad? Lisa?
Well, yeah, I just fundamentally disagree with that premise. I think that that's comes from the same place when somebody thinks that the U.S. is the puppet master manipulating the political situation. The U.S. can't do that in Pakistan, does not seek to do that. The U.S. does want to see stability in Pakistan, but that doesn't mean that the U.S. supports one faction over another or one leader over another. This has been the perennial belief that Pakistanis in general have held, is that somehow the U.S. is behind the scenes manipulating everything, supporting the military or supporting, such and such leader. And it's a fallacy. Unfortunately, what it does is by looking to the U.S., then I think Pakistanis fail to put the pressure on their own system for the changes that are needed in terms of developing the democracy, developing the democratic institutions. It's just easier to blame the United States for the problems that are happening. So I think the best thing the U.S. can do is just stay back, wish Pakistan well, provide humanitarian assistance, work with the leaders that it can. But, unfortunately, some of this perception will never die. No matter what the United States does, there are going to be Pakistanis who, want to blame the United States or believe the U.S. is manipulating the situation behind the scenes. And it's just inaccurate. But I would just add on Doug's comments, he explained how the U.S. and Pakistan were at odds on Afghanistan for 20 years. I would just say, now that the Taliban's back in power, we're not all of a sudden going to see these convergences between the U.S. and Pakistan on Afghanistan. I think that we will continue to diverge. And that's why I say, as the Taliban, show their extremist stripes more and more moving forward, I think it's bound to cause tension between the U.S. and Pakistan, because Pakistan is going to continue to support the Taliban. They believe that's their best bet for keeping India out of Afghanistan. And they're not going to, go from supporting this group for 30 years and then, all of a sudden change course or support a different group. That's not going to happen. So as bad as the Taliban is, as much as the TTP is bothersome for the Pakistan military, it's not going to change their fundamental support to the Taliban and their fundamental support to ensuring that the Taliban remains in power in Afghanistan. And that will be, I think, a growing source of tension between Washington and Islamabad.
Okay, we have only a couple of minutes left now. Any last thoughts here on the part of the panel?
Could I quickly add to the last point on Afghanistan, Marvin?
Please.
Look, when the Taliban took over, there was this initial euphoria in Pakistan, and that quickly dissipated. And then the Pakistanis, as Doug mentioned, the military in particular, they started kind of worrying more about terrorism from Afghanistan. And then slowly, that also changed when they started to see the Taliban to be or to become a lot more unmanageable. So right now it's as much terrorism from Afghanistan, like the TTP and even Lashkar-e-Taiba and JEM, as much as it is with respect to managing the Taliban from within. And so I think that country is one of those places and domains to watch closely, and that could potentially also, shape the future of U.S.-Pakistan's relationship going forward. I think we should also not forget that the Taliban's own ruling dispensation in Kabul, also in Kandahar, have strings attached to all of their fingers, and each of them are serving a different master, including inside Pakistan. But it's also, a regime that's no space shuttle. They've proven all too well through their actions that they're very anti-future. They've made it very, very clear as to what kind of politics or system they want to pursue, and which involves basically owing this unconditional fealty and loyalty to the Taliban's emir. And they've also, essentially put together the skeleton of a very strictly Hanafi state in which they have effectively married the Taliban's clerical power and the Taliban's executive power. And it's really hard to know, from practice as to how much is based on visible Islam and how much is based on the Taliban's hidden or invisible Islam. But domestically also, they have engaged in this class conflict and class warfare for all kinds of resources through their politics of vice and virtue, rewards and punishment, reprisal. And I think to them, not all lives are equal, especially those who doesn't respond to call to serve under the Taliban and their regime. And I think that's what Taliban's televangelists are preaching all over. Externally, the Taliban don't believe in the phrase that my enemy's enemy is my friend. No, it's just my enemy's enemy is just another sucker that I need to worry about. And I think that's precisely what's happening with respect to Pakistan. They're blackmailing the entire region. They still expect to be offered enough to walk away from jihadi groups like Al-Qaeda or others. ISIS has really increased. I call it ISIS X because there's an X number of them, an X number of their franchises. So we have seen important also alignments of these competing militant forces inside the country, and also seen the Taliban actually quietly registering foreign fighters and issuing them weapon permits. So in all of this, I think Pakistan plays an important role, and I think they could potentially become a sort of an interpreter or a translator for the Taliban, and as they normalize their relationships with the world.
Thank you, Jordan. Well, we've run over our time, and I'm just delighted that the panel have joined us. It's been a really rich discussion that you've had. And I know that the viewing audience shares that. And thanks to you. And if I didn't get at all the questions, please excuse that. And hope to see you at another such event. So that's all for now.